So there you go. Start. And good morning to everybody. And this is the Morning Constitution. I'm your host, Joel Hawksley. I have a guest today. It's Rusty Roberts, a good friend. More of it's a long story. We'll tell you about. It's like Rusty. Rusty is like the candidate that just ran for Stephanie Murphy's seat. So it's going to be really interesting when we start talking. So
hopefully interesting
because it wasn't her seat when we knew it. So.
That is correct.
And we'll talk about that too. So we're at the Oxford. And it's the Sports Pub and Secret Society. I think it's an awesome opportunity, and Rusty has joined us. Rusty and I have one thing that we'd like to talk about, and it's history. So it's a lot of history. But today, I want to ask Rusty, tell everybody about yourself and some of the incredible things that I know about you that they need to know about you.
Well, it could be a long story. How long is this show?
It's as long as you make it. It's
Okay.
I try to stay at 30 minutes, but I have done an hour and a half. So
My history in Central Florida is actually, because I grew up in St. Petersburg, has been pretty much all politics, a little bit of business. But I got started in politics. I'll sort of preface this a little bit. Got started in politics at a very young age, 23 years old, when I walked into the door of some guy who was running for the state legislature and needed a volunteer. And I thought this might be fun. And I asked, do you need any volunteers for a campaign? And he said, yeah. And he happened to win for a state house seat over in St. Petersburg. And then he asked me to be his aide after he won. And I had wanted to be in the hotel business before I got into politics. That was going to be my career. And then suddenly I was in politics, and he said, you want to be my aide? And I said, sure, and he said, let's go to Tallahassee. So we did. And so I became a legislative aide in Tallahassee to a state house member. And the guy across the hall from us, our office in Washington, in Tallahassee in the Capitol, was another freshman legislator, 1976, a guy named John Micah. And he was in the state house first year. And he happened to be a fraternity brother of the guy I worked for. And so I got to know John Micah. So that was the beginning of now a 40-plus year relationship of being friends and also being working for him and being partners in politics. And when John Micah ran for Congress in 1992, he called me up and asked me to be his chief of staff. And that's how I got started here, 20 years, 18 years with him. But before that, very interestingly, John Micah called me up out of the blue in 1980 because he had just lost a Senate seat here in Florida to Senator Tony Jennings. And he started managing the campaign of a lady who was running for the United States Senate named Paula Hawkins. And anybody who's been a longtime resident of Central Florida knows who Paula Hawkins was, the Maitland housewife. And since we are in the middle of Women's History Month,
exactly,
I think it's important to mention that because Paula Hawkins was an extraordinary lady. And John Micah ended up being her chief of staff, ran her campaign. She won, became chief of staff, called me to be on the staff of her in the Florida office in Miami. And so that's how I got started getting to know Central Florida and working for Central Florida politics. And Senator Hawkins was a very unique lady. And I'll just give you a little brief history of her because she was the Maitland housewife because she ran for the Public Service Commission in 1972 and the first woman ever elected to statewide office in Florida in 1972.
1972, awesome.
Public Service Commission was all elected in those days. It became appointed later. Then she ran in 1980. She was the first woman in the history of the United States to be elected to the United States Senate in her own right. The only other women that ever served in the United States Senate were there by virtue of their husband had died, and so they were appointed to fulfill that term. And in another case, the daughter of a presidential candidate, Alf Landon, Nancy Landon Castleman. But all these previous women, there's only about 2 or 3, had served only because of that. And when Senator Hawkins was elected, she did it in her own right without the benefit of a famous family name. And so that's very historical for Florida. And I will tell you that after that, I actually worked for another woman in the United States Congress before John Micah, who had a historical first. And her name was Ileana Ross-Layton, and she spent about 30 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. I was her first chief of staff for just 3 years. First Cuban-American woman to serve in the United States House of Representatives. So I got started in politics really by working with some very interesting and very dynamic women.
Yeah, but Rusty, I thought quite often I find that there are no women Republicans. I mean, if you listen to the Democrats, they would tell you, hey, how did you work for 2 prominent Republican women when they don't exist, right? The Democrats don't want us to think about that, right?
Well, first of all, they knew how to read. And that's why they were Republicans.
There you go. Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
No, politics, the women in politics back then were dominated by Democrats. And I knew there were several very, very successful women in politics in Florida, in the Florida legislature, Florida Senate, during those years that I remember them. Some of them very, very nice, dynamic, intelligent, very good people. Democrats in those days were different than Democrats today.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the 70s, you had more moderate Democrats. You had some conservative Democrats, men or women, but it's changed quite a bit since then. But those 2 ladies I just mentioned were trailblazers in Florida in politics. Florida has, and I don't know if anybody knows this. Well, obviously a lot of people know this, but there is something in Florida called the Commission on the Status of Women that was started in the late 70s or 80s. Mm-hmm. And they started something called the Florida Women's Hall of Fame in 1980 when Bob Graham was governor. Okay. And Senator Hawkins is a member has been not appointed, or what do you call it, selected to the Florida Women's Hall of Fame. They do it every 3 years. Every year. They 3 women are join that list. So there's about 129 now who have that. And if you go to the state capitol in Tallahassee, there's a wall with plaques of all the women who are in the Florida Women's Hall of Fame. Senator Toni Jennings is there. Ileana Ross-Layton is there. Mary McLeod Bethune-Cookman is there. Bethune-Cookman College.
Well, she's up in Washington now.
She's in her statue's in Washington, yes. D.C. So anybody wants to see what kind of women are being honored, they can just go to the website, Florida Women's Hall of Fame. And some other interesting, some other names of Central Florida women who nobody really knows. There's a lady named Judith Kersey, who was the first woman engineer in NASA, started in the Apollo program. Mm-hmm. So they don't pick just women in politics, but people in business, like Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, because of her Everglades work, and Zora Neale Hurston, Frances Langford. Does anybody know who Frances Langford? No, you don't know. Mm-hmm. She toured with Bob Hope and doing USO show. She was a movie star in the 30s and the 40s. She actually replaced Judy Garland in Bob Hope's USO tours. So all kinds of women in all kinds of backgrounds. Julia Tuttle, Gloria Estefan is on the, and I've met her, and she's great. Janet Reno, who was our longest serving Attorney General in the United States.
Yeah, that's and she had a disability too, so that she has a lot of history to her. I mean, especially in Miami.
So I really
people love her in Miami.
Yeah, they do. So I really strayed off your question, I think, but
no, I wanted you to talk because that was the thing. When I talked to you prior, I said it's a lot of history, but right now we're in Women's History Month, and Black History Month. There's a lot of history in the Republican Party there too, which nobody wants to talk about. So I'm glad that you mentioned these phenomenal women. So.
Well, there are women Republican clubs all over the state, for instance, in politics. And I think they're more prevalent than Democratic Women's Club. And I've been to many of those clubs all over the state. You have too. And these are very dedicated women who care about society, care about their children being brought up in the right kind of society, care about quality of life. And we need their perspective, especially men in politics.
Well, I think they're very strong. I mean, if you don't go through the women's groups as a candidate, you don't know anybody, because they're the ones who are going to connect you with the people that are important. It's just like a domino effect.
Yeah,
they know everybody, and if they don't know them, they're going to find a way to get you in front of them.
Well, when I announced for Congress last summer and ran for Congress, and the first thing I did was started going to those women's Republican clubs, and that's helped spread my area of influence in terms of meeting new people and figuring out who are the players in politics.
But you got in the race late. I mean, this was a decision that you took a long time to think about, because this was something that you wanted to do, and it was something you had a passion for, but you got in late. So
I got in late, and I had the advantage of name ID. I would say in the political class of Central Florida, but obviously not rank and file voters. And how do you get your name up there? You have to do a lot of legwork and a lot of door knocking, and you need the money to get your name out there, get on television mailings and things like that. And I did think about it too long and made the final decision late in the game. It was March of last year, so almost a year ago, right about now, that I decided to pull the trigger. Many conversations with my former boss, Congressman Micah, who I will tell you, the first time I told him I was thinking, we were having breakfast. We usually meet almost once a week for breakfast or lunch or something. And I said, John, I'm really thinking I want to run for Congress. I just don't like the direction that I see the country going, for sure, and I'm a little nervous about the country of the Republican, the future of the Republican Party. So he said, all right, let's first get you counseling.
This is a guy. This is a guy. Whenever you ask him if he was going to run, if he ever thinks about running for Congress again, he says, I'd rather have a lobotomy. So I mean, yes, I know that he had to have said you need some counseling.
He did. He warned me. He said, this will be tough. He said, but if you want to do it, I'll support you. And of course he did, in a big way. So I started that conversation with him in the fall, and really took way too long, as you just said, deciding in March, because I was just, so I would tell you, I walked into a Publix at some point where I shop. And they have all the Publixes have a picture of the founder of Publix supermarkets on the wall somewhere near the customer service desk, George Jenkins.
Yep.
And some of them have a quote, George Jenkins. And I walked in this Publix, my Publix in Lake Mary that I go to, and the quote was something like, it was, if you want to accomplish something, the hardest part of doing something is beginning. Just begin. Mm-hmm. And I thought, he's speaking to me, so let's begin. Because in leading up to it, you think, all I have to do, I have to raise money, I have to get television, I have to get consultants, I have to do this and that. And it's really, I have to get buttons, and it's mind-boggling what you have to do. But once you start, you just start ticking off everything on your list, and you do it. And so I was 8 of us in the race. I was not successful. I was in the middle of the pack. I raised a lot of money early on, but some of the other candidates raised a lot more money, and so that's part of the challenge.
Well, I do want to talk to Brady Duke at some point, because I want to know how you raise that much money and still come in third.
And Brady's a terrific guy.
Right, he's a great guy.
We had among all of our candidates, all of us became friends. I became closer friends with some than others. And Corey Mills, who was the eventual winner, and I actually became good friends. Brady and I were very friendly too. And I had talked with Brady before I decided to run because about maybe him running, but he's not experienced in politics, and that is one of the pitfalls of a new candidate. If you're not experienced, sometimes you're not sure if the consultants are telling you, what they're telling you is really the right thing you should be doing.
There's a lot. You guys amaze me because the way you guys trailblazed through this, it was amazing because you never ever I don't think you had any animosity from any of the other candidates. I don't think you guys got into a blood war.
No, it's very unusual.
And two people were really at each other's throats, but they didn't go to a blood war.
No, they did not. There was more of that war was behind the scenes, third party, generated.
Right.
But publicly, everybody, it's unusually, because we had about 8 or 9 debates. And when you have that many debates, that sometimes the mud is going to sling. And it didn't really. It was just.
You went to an unusual debate where there was a whole panel of both sides and everybody just kind of asking questions, and you and Ted Edwards were the only ones that answered a certain question a certain way, and you got like the Sentinel's attention. They were like, okay, now he's got the Sentinel's attention. Is he really? I mean,
is that good or bad?
That's the thing. I know that Micah one time. I was interning at the time, and he goes, they wrote something, and it was so inaccurate, and he just wanted a response, and he just get everybody you can to write the Sentinel, the editor, just write the Sentinel and see if you can get posted in the letters to the editor. And I did. I got mine posted, and it's like he gave me a thank you. Like he's always that person that's gonna thank you, even if it's something you didn't even like. Hey, I just did it because you needed it done. You needed.
One of the most important things in politics, actually in life, is to say thank you to people.
Yeah,
and it's more so in politics because it's good politicking to do that. It's good politics to do that, and it's just good social behavior. And so.
No, it's not. It's not common, and
No.
You say it, but like Stephanie Murphy never said thank you to anybody, unless her staff wrote something for somebody. But she's never. 6 years, she's never said thank you to anybody. No organization.
Well, a lot of people give money to candidates, and I've written a lot of checks to candidates over the years, and I am just shocked at how many candidates don't even bother to send you a thank you letter for your contribution. I am shocked by that. When I worked for Congressman Micah, we had the routine set. That thank you letter went out within a week of that. It was a system that worked. And in my race, I made sure that everybody got a thank you letter. In my case, it was 2 weeks because I had a smaller staff, but we got them out. Them out.
So I want to talk about. I do want to talk about John and Congressman Micah. I have a lot to say. I could say good things about him. As a matter of fact, when you came with this Constitution, it's like maybe you taught John Micah, but everybody had to have one of those at all times if you worked on his staff, because
we gave these away.
You just have to know these things. So you were not my chief of staff when I worked for Congressman Micah, because you had moved on. So you're going to have to talk about that also.
Okay.
So wherever you want to start, we can start with either, Congressman Micah or Brightline. I mean, there's so much, and transportation is huge in our conversation today.
I'll segue into that with Mr. Micah, because truly he's one of the finest members of Congress that I've seen in operation, and I've been represented by several, but also I got to know how they all worked. And he was really very focused on the district. He was on the transportation committee and then eventually became chairman, but he was really focused on transportation as an economic driver of a component of our economy that's probably one of the most important, because if you have a job, you have to have a way to get to a job, and traffic congestion and all those kinds of things are very important When he got in, when he was running for office, he made a couple of promises in 1992. People may or may not remember, but the Eastern Beltway, the Greenway, stopped at about the Seminole County line, a little bit over the Seminole County line. So there, you couldn't get to I-4 on the State Road 417. And Mr.
So you paid to go on a road that you had to get off of to.
Yeah, I think at Red Bug Lake Road or something. And so he went to Washington and he said, I'm going to find the money to fix the missing link. And he did that right away. And we had another issue with the St. Johns River Bridge, which is a small little narrow bridge. And he got that widened. It needs to be widened again.
Already.
Amazingly, when they built that, when they redid the widening, they put pilings in for future expansion. So it's halfway done.
Nice.
That's there. He's really left a strong legacy of major transportation improvements. His last legacy we're seeing now in the I-4 Express and the I-4 Ultimate.
Exactly.
That he was chairman of the committee when he wrote the bill that authorized them to do that, because before that you weren't allowed to do toll lanes on interstates, and he put language in the law that said you can have toll lanes on interstates only if you have no net loss of free lanes. So
exactly. So he got a lot of he gets a lot of blame for the toll road that goes down the middle, but he's basically, you can't have a New Jersey Turnpike anymore, because you can't take an interstate away. You have 4 lanes on the right, 4 lanes on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Period. You can't get those. They have to be there. Anything else is on the state. I think he protects the interstate because of that project.
He did, yeah, because there are a lot of the departments of transportation wanted to start making toll lanes on existing lanes. So that was very important. His other major accomplishment, and a lot of Republicans, sort of cringe about it, or not being real strongly in favor, is Sunrail. He's responsible for really helping getting Sunrail off the ground, because we had a light rail project that was underway, and that would have gone down I-4, which I think is a dumb idea, and it didn't happen, thankfully. It was killed by the Orange County Commission. And so Congressman Micah got together with local transportation leaders, and they came up with a plan to buy the CSX tracks and create Sunrail. Sunrail doesn't make money. It never will. It's not supposed to. They're not designed to. But it is an very important part of the economy of Central Florida. And it's not something that people will see the benefits today, because it's been around, 10 years now? Mm-hmm. But they'll really see the benefits of Sunrail 20 years from now and 30 years from now. And so that having that kind of system in place as an alternative is very, very important. And Congressman Micah was always a critic of Amtrak, a supporter of Amtrak, but critic of the way they operated, and wanted them to do better, because they can make money, and they do in some sections.
You're very, very New York, right?
The new Northeast Corridor does make money, about $400-500 million a year profit, but the long distance routes do not. And so he had a plan to privatize the Northeast Corridor and have Amtrak focus on the core mission of long distance. And obviously that didn't happen. But what's intercity rail is very important. Amtrak's important to that. That's how we segued into my last job before I retired and ran for office, was Brightline, because folks who are following that know that the Right Line project is going to connect to Orlando with revenue service in about 4 or 5 months, probably midsummer.
It changed ownership for a short period of time there, didn't it?
So you want to go historical for
a
minute?
Little bit, yeah.
Historical. The Bright Line project is on the Florida East Coast Railway tracks, which have been up down the East Coast from Jacksonville to Miami. They've been in existence since about 1895 was when Miami opened. So the late 1800s started in Jacksonville, worked its way south. Henry Flagler formed the Florida East Coast Railway, built that railroad all the way to Key West. Most folks who are longtime Floridians know that. And if you really like trains and want to know the history of the Key West extension and the whole Flagler line, get a book called Last Train to Paradise.
Last Train
to Paradise by Les Standiford, author in Miami. A friend of mine, we play golf once in a while. But it's a great book. He's written 2 books, that and a follow-up book all about Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago, because Henry Flagler built Palm Beach. Henry Flagler built the Breakers Hotel, and which is the last existing hotel in his.
Another individual who writes a lot about Florida history, and he has a book out, is George Lemieux. If you've had a chance, Senator Lemieux. I knew him when he was my chairman of the Broward County wreck. So that was just before he went up to Tallahassee to work with Charlie Crist, and get appointed. When our senator became the transportation secretary. I mean, the history. I love history and the little things that you find out, like to know Senator Lemieux when he was the chairman, and then the way he just rocketed up.
Now he runs a big law firm.
Now he was running it before, and now he's running even better. But he has a thing over at the college too. It's I just forgot the name of it, but he's very, very involved in the community and trying to drive people to understand our history and understand the beauty of Florida.
And he's a regular rider of Brightline. I've seen him on the trains because his office is in Fort Lauderdale and West Palm, and instead of take that crazy drive, hops on the train. Brightline is an extension of the Florida East Coast Railway. When Henry Flagler built that railroad, he had freight and passenger. Passenger ran up until 1968 when it went out of business. And it used to be double tracked. And then they took up the track because they didn't need two tracks for freight, only one track. Florida East Coast Railways purchased about 15 years ago by a New York equity firm called Fortress. And they look at the product they bought and they said, wonder if we could make a go at putting passenger rail back on this railroad, 50 years later. And they decided to study it, and they figured out maybe they could make a go of it, and Brightline came to being. It was announced in 2012 that they were going to turn this freight railroad back into a passenger railroad and then take it all the way to Orlando. They put that extra track back, rebuilt the existing track, and been for the past 10 years building that out. I went to work for Brightline in 2013, and that's what. And that's because of my relationship with Congressman Micah and my experience in transportation, because of his congressional work that really brought them to my attention.
Do you think people really know transportation like they should? I mean, the interstate highway system, I love it because anytime I mention something, there's always a Republican I get to credit for it. Like this is Dwight David Eisenhower. So, I mean, the reason he built the highway system was because he wanted to make sure that we could move our troops and everything else very rapidly. So the history of transportation is phenomenal too. And I know you're a big history guy.
Well, I guess, and I haven't really read this, but I've just heard this, so somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But and he had in Germany, he saw where the Germans had a network of roads like that.
Yes.
That he thought was very efficient for moving. And his idea was, right, we need our military to have quick, rapid response. I don't think he envisioned what we're seeing today.
I don't think he realized it all. No, because, I mean, it's huge. You can't build in fast enough. You can't get enough lanes. The car is, Henry Ford, thank you very much, because, and it's incredible. It's like they take over. Now, is it true? Here's a question I don't have an answer to. Is it true that there's a break in the tracks to get to the Jacksonville port, so they have to truck? They have to truck a certain distance away?
To Jacksonville port?
Yeah.
Florida East Coast Railway does not go into Port of Jacksonville, so maybe I think CSX does, I think.
Okay.
So Florida East Coast Railway freight has direct access to Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale, Port of Miami. There's tracks, and if you go downtown Miami, you drive over those tracks, and there's a bridge over the water to the island, Davis Island, where Port Miami is. They have direct access to the Port of Palm Beach, but and they do not have access to Port Canaveral. There was talk of it some years ago, but the environmentalists were really opposed to having a railroad go across Merritt Island. And then, no, not Jacksonville. They don't.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, rail is huge. The history, when you get into history, that's the number one bad guy.
Rail is, and rail has been in the news a lot lately because of the Ohio derailment, right? Freight rail, and
Right.
and then Norfolk Southern, and they had a second derailment in Ohio, which no leaks or anything. But when it comes down to it, rail is the second safest form of transportation, and it's I think 2% of fatalities are by rail. Most of it's by road, And there's a lot of materials. What's the word I'm thinking of? Toxic materials that travel on the road that would be much safer if it traveled on rail. LNG is a controversy, liquefied natural gas,
Right.
because Florida East Coast Railway is the second railroad in the country to get permission to transport LNG. And so a lot of people are saying this is too dangerous, it can explode. Well, it's minus 260 degrees. It can't explode when it's minus 260 degrees. But they do run a little bit of LNG from Hialeah to Port Everglades and Lauderdale and back, and very strict regulations. They have to go like 20 miles an hour and things like that. Alaska runs it, but nobody else does. But most of LNG is on the highway. To me, I'd rather see it on the rails because I don't want a truck who's got a tank full of
But people
gas.
don't know how to read those signs. Like,
No.
if you could read the signs and you had anything to do with hazardous material, like I was in the military and I drove hazardous material, so I had to go to
Did you?
class. So once I learned, I'm like, I see certain things on a truck and I'm like, how far away can I get from this truck? And how quickly can I be away? It's like,
And they don't clearly say on the tank, this is hazardous material. They might say hazardous, but not going to tell you what's in it.
no,
You know?
and there's certain,
And there's a reason.
certain
There's
colors, certain colors and certain things you want to look out for. So,
good reason for that.
but now a lot of the Florida Constitution had a very controversial thing about rail in it, and it created the fact that all our bills have to say how much something's going to cost, because didn't we not vote for a bullet train to go whipping around the state of Florida
We did. What year was that? That was
around 2000 something?
yeah, about that. Just at the beginning of Jeb Bush's, or just before Jeb Bush's governor. It was a petition drive to get in the Constitution. It was funded by a gentleman who just passed away from Lakeland. Petition drive in the Constitution that Florida shall build a high-speed railway by a certain date. Then Jeb came into office. They were getting close to the date. They were getting nowhere toward getting a high-speed rail, and so Jeb, through the legislature, had put it on the ballot to repeal that, and he did. And that was smart because look. And then we had another go at under President Obama. He awarded Florida a bunch of money to build a high-speed road between Tampa and Orlando. Would have been billions of dollars. Governor Scott said no and sent that money back. It was after that. That is the incident that gave Brightline the idea that maybe we can do it. If that had not been canceled, Brightline may not have done what they did. Brightline came in and said, back then they were called All Aboard Florida East Coast Railway. Said, well, wait a minute, we happen to own the tracks. We're close to Orlando. We can build 40 miles of track to finish the job and get to Orlando. Let's see if we can do it. And they did. I think it's much smarter to have much more beneficial to our state to have a private company build that railroad than have the taxpayers spend billions of dollars. That they would have gone 90 miles for a lot more money than Brightline is doing to go 235 miles. It would have been more expensive if the government did, but Brightline's doing it the smart way. They're lucky because they own the property. That's the start.
No, that's great. And then it's going to be at the MCO. So,
the airport. And that station is just spectacular. And this train is European-style luxury, nothing like it in the United States. The trains are built in America, built in California. They're building a new plant in the East Coast.
Well, you're gonna have to hook us up. We're gonna have to podcast from Brightline. So we'll have to do that. So
you can do that. Well, you could set up right at Orlando Brightline Station and probably do a nice.
Listen, I would love to talk about them because it's phenomenal what they're doing, and people don't give them credit. Everybody wants to be a critic to these things, but when you take government and private industry and you put them together, great things can happen. So I see that. Look, I want to talk about airports for a little bit because I want to talk about this little tiny airport that does a lot of business around here that I think Mr. Micah had a lot of help in getting the Sanford Airport. I think it's so underrated, but it does so much for our area. And as a matter of fact, Sanford also takes the vehicles up towards Virginia. So there's a lot that goes on in Sanford.
Auto train. So Sanford Airport used to be a military Air Force air station, and they deeded it over to the city. I can't remember what year. You should have prepped me on that one. I would have looked it up.
Well, that's okay. I just happened to realize. Listen, there's so much about John Micah you could say. Congressman Micah, he is the reason University of Central Florida is called University of Central Florida. He co-sponsored the bill, but he wasn't the sponsor of it. But these are things that he's got his hands in so many different things that.
I have one better than that.
Okay.
So Orlando Airport, forget Sanford over here right now. Orlando Airport is McCoy Field. That was also a military installation because the executive airport used to be their major airport. So they need to move the international airport out and put it, and they got McCoy, which is why it's MCO, not OIA for the code. Mm-hmm. State Road 436 just ran right into the airport, and it ran over what is now the beach line.
Really?
There's a stoplight.
Wow.
John Micah is in the Florida legislature, and I think Dick Batchelor helped him as well. He was in the legislature at the time. Said, we need to have this airport's going to grow. Disney was here. We need to get rid of this bottleneck, this traffic intersection, four-way stop. And so he got funds to build an overpass into Orlando Airport over the beach line from 436. Everybody said, this is nuts. That you don't need to do this. You're wasting money. This airport will never be require that kind of mobility. And so people fought it. And but the visionaries prevailed, and they got that overpass. But it was really called a boondoggle in its day. And that happens so often in transportation. Everything we do now is, early on is a boondoggle, and then find out that it really was
or it wasn't big enough.
Or it wasn't big enough.
It's like, hey, well, you guys planned this thing, and once it opened up, you didn't see that there was going to be an extra, 100% travel on this road. So.
And Sanford Airport is the same thing. It's a growing airport. It's a great reliever airport for Orlando. Other airlines like Allegiant and some other little-known names go there. A lot of charters from England. They get a lot of traffic, and it's growing every year. And so what Mr. Micah did, Congressman Micah did, is help bring funds to them to extend their runway and safety, get new towers, things like that. But it really helped that airport grow. And that's when Congress is doing its job, I think.
Absolutely. So let's see. So we had the airport. So we talked about the rail.
Well, let me just say, this stuff is all still very important to me because when I retired from Brightline in 2020, the beginning of COVID, the Governor DeSantis was kind enough to appoint me to the Florida Transportation Commission. After that, Florida Transportation Commission is a 9-member body, all appointed by the governor to oversee Florida Department of Transportation. So I just came back from our annual meeting in Tallahassee with our commission meeting. And what we do is offer policy guidance to the Department of Transportation on things they're doing. They put together their work plans, their 5-year work plans, working with the local metropolitan planning organizations, MPOs. It's MetroPlan here in Orlando. And we approve those work plans. We approve their budgets. And so that's keeping me very involved in the whole facet of transportation all over Florida: roads, rail, airports, seaports, and spaceports. We oversee, and the Expressway Authority. So we oversee FDOT, we oversee Central Florida Expressway Authority, Miami Expressway Authority, Jacksonville Transportation Authority, Sunrail, Tri-Rail.
And this is an example of the newspapers giving, DeSantis a hard time when he actually puts qualified people like yourself up there. I mean, you know more about transportation than anybody I know. And, well, Micah does too.
Except for Micah.
But he's traveling the world right now, so I can't get to his ear every day.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, it's like there's a Micahplex up in Daytona. That 7 used to be huge. It went all the way from Daytona all the way down. And
Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University has the John L. Micah Center for Technological something. The Micahplex.
Yep, the Micahplex, and it's right over near the airport. So
yes,
it's beautiful buildings. If anybody's ever seen it,
it is, and they do great work at Embry-Riddle. And that's one of the things when Congressman Micah was chairman of the aviation subcommittee for a while. In fact, time permitting, tell you a very fascinating story about where we were on 9/11 when John Mike was chairman of aviation. But he brought a lot of money to Embry-Riddle to help. They got involved in helping us modernize our air traffic control system. So they're part of that program.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Training pilots. It's a very important university.
No, I think it's incredible, and I think it's like one of those universities that's under the radar.
Yes.
It produces some very fascinating people, and they just go on to do their job, and they're instrumental in space and in Boeing and Lockheed and all these different places.
They're well placed, especially for space, because our space industry now is just taking off. I had the opportunity to tour the Blue Origin facility and the SpaceX facility about 2 weeks ago with our Transportation Commission, and I'm just amazed at what I saw out there. What's growing or in Titusville is just exploding now in space-related industry. It's great for our economy.
So wrap us up with that 9/11 story. So I'd love to hear that.
Where were you in 9/11? Right? Everybody wants to know where were you? And well, I'm older, but I know where I was when.
I know exactly where I was when 9/11. I was in a stock room. I was in a stock room, in an electronic stock room in a Target, and I was listening to the radio, and they were making jokes about it. And then the next thing they said is, "Oh my God, this is not little prop planes. These are huge." And they started the whole conversation changed. That's where I was, but you have to have been.
I was in the Rayburn
place.
I was in the Rayburn House office building as chief of staff to Congressman Micah. He was chairman of the aviation subcommittee, and he happened to be that morning at the Pentagon having a meeting with the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and several other members of Congress, having a breakfast meeting. And we have TVs in our office, up in the wall. It's probably CNN at the time, but when they were a normal news organization. And we saw the plane hit the first tower. And of course, that was shocking, and everybody's now attention was. And so Congressman Mike called me up from the Pentagon, and he said, "What's going on?" He said, "I was having breakfast with Secretary Rumsfeld with about half a dozen other members of Congress. Somebody came in, whispered something in the secretary's ear. He said, 'Gentlemen, this got to go. Breakfast is over.' Went back." And so the members of Congress kind of didn't know. Nobody really explained anything. And finally somebody said, "Well, there was been an accident in New York." And so Micah called me and I said, "Well, we're watching on TV, a plane hit the tower." And as I'm talking to him, a second plane hit the second tower. And I said, "Oh my gosh, the second tower has been hit." And he said, he's not watching TV. He's just on his cell phone. He said, "No, you must be mistaken. They're re-rolling the tape." I said, "No, John, the second tower has been hit." Because at the time we thought it was an errant airplane. It was an accident.
Right. Everybody thought it was an accident.
And so then he said, "Okay," he said, I'm coming back. Pentagon had not been hit yet, but it was about to be hit by that second plane, the third plane. And so he missed his ride because they brought those congressmen over in a shuttle bus, but he was talking on the phone so much to me, he missed his ride.
Oh, wow.
And so they got somebody to drive him over. And right after he left and was on his way back to the Capitol, the plane hit the Pentagon. Now, it hit the other side. He was on the other side of the Pentagon anyway.
Right, because it hit the Navy side.
Yeah,
right?
It's a big
complex, but yeah.
It wasn't where he was, but it's still rather frightening to know that happened. So he made it back, and so everybody knows what happened throughout that day. They eventually evacuated all of us a couple hours later, and everybody went home. All airplanes were out of the sky. FAA ordered every airplane out of the sky, and for the first time since aviation began, there were no planes in the sky over the United States of America.
Was that not the most deafening silence that you've ever? For that whole period of time, I can still, the eeriness, that how much you miss that aircraft sound. It was like, yes. It was eerie. So,
and then after that, it was, what do we do? And we, as chairman of aviation, he was heavily involved and pretty much helped write the bill to create TSA. So if you want to complain about TSA, complain to John Micah. But the bill he wrote, TSA was going to be all privately funded. They were going to create a federal agency to create safety standards, a standardized screening system that private companies would have to follow, and that had oversight. And the Senate, some folks in the Senate said, "No, we want a new agency, public agency." A lot of Republicans, including Mr. Micah, fought that, said we can't create a new agency. We don't need to do that. And so Senate voted 99-0 to create a public agency. And that took the wind out of the sails of the House, who wanted the privately run but federally managed. And so Mr. Micah was able to amend the bill to put 5 airports in that bill that would be private as a pilot program. And then other airports could opt out later on. Stanford Airport actually opted out and is run privately with federal supervision, and several others are.
And it's a great airport to get in and out of. I mean, people like to blame, hey, you created TSA. Well, I created TSA. It's a whole different look than what it is today. That's the message. Right
and the other thing was all the airlines lost a lot of money, right? And so the federal government decided that they needed to help the airlines get back on their feet financially. So Mr. Micah through his committee, wrote a bill to create something called the Airline Stabilization Fund, where the airlines could borrow money from the federal government to help make their payroll and get things back rolling again and get back in the air. Not every airline applied, but most of them did. And United is a big example that I recall that had a large loan. Every airline paid that money back in full with interest in the air. The government actually made money on that program. And of course it was dissolved as soon as it was over with. So
isn't he also instrumental in leading the those empty buildings? He got frustrated with all these empty buildings, and he made it a point that we got to do something about this. They can't stay empty. And
GSA, General Service Administration,
yes.
Public buildings are under the Transportation Committee's jurisdiction. And so he had the staff do a survey of how many buildings GSA owns that nobody's in. Hundreds across the country, hundreds. And so he wrote a report called Sitting on Your Assets. And so he forced really GSA to take the old post office, which was sitting vacant on Pennsylvania Avenue, beautiful building, for years sitting vacant, and put out bids to have that turned into a hotel, which they did. Trump won that bid.
Yes, he did.
It was totally competitive, properly done, well before he ran for president. And now it's owned by, I think, Marriott Corporation, but not owned, but it's a lease. That building is owned by the government, leased to be a hotel.
So again, not that the government's supposed to make money, but I think Congressman Micah knows how to at least bring the tax dollars where they need to be.
And he does it very cleverly, because in that instance he wanted to bring GSA to the table, and so instead of having the hearing, you have to have a hearing,
right,
get testimony. Instead of doing it in the House office building, in the middle of winter, he moved the committee to the basement of the old post office, which was closed up and no heat, and had them testify in their top coats and shivering about this building that you've left vacant for many years.
So now to wrap this up, I have to ask the question: did you roll the joint for him, or who rolled the joint for Congressman Micah? And if anybody wants to know, it's on YouTube. This is a funny story, but I love this story.
I did not roll it. Pretty sure it was a fake joint. I did not roll it.
I'm pretty sure it was too.
But it was a hearing on the drug war, and that's a good memory. I've forgotten about that one. He was good with props.
He was excellent with props, and I'd love to get a chance to have him on the show, but he's always traveling. But you spend a lot more time with him, so
a fee, I'll book him for you.
Okay, well, I'm going to get you onto Owl, OWWLL, and let me tell you, it's an app that they'll have to pay you for your expertise, and I think this is the most value I've had on my show in a long time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rusty
Glad
Roberts, absolutely a wonderful individual, and he's our guest here on the Morning Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.